What's up, fellas? In the first of today's videos, we're going to be taking a look at the James Harden trade, which might seem a little bit odd to you guys, but the reason we're taking a look back at this is because we've gotten some new details on what exactly went down during the process of James Harden being traded from Houston to Brooklyn, the other teams that were involved, some other trade packages that were offered, and just kind of the context around the situation from a bit more of an insider perspective. We got some answers to some details that I've always kind of wondered about, and that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. But really quickly before we get started, if you're new here, what's up? My name is Tucker. I upload NBA content on this channel every single day, twice a day. So it's the most consistent NBA content on YouTube. If that's something you're looking for, then consider subscribing. You can also leave a like rating on the videos as well, and check me out at various socials and a link tree down in the description below. With those things said, let's go ahead and get started. So we all kind of understand what happened here with the Harden trade, right? And you know, the article goes into this, but I can just kind of talk about this paraphrasing, and then we'll get to the specifics of the trade stuff here in a second. He was in Houston, and he kind of realized it probably wasn't going to work, right? He advocated for the Russell Westbrook thing. He thought it would be a really good fit with him and Westbrook. They ended up flipping Chris Paul and multiple pick swaps and stuff in order to get Westbrook, and halfway through the year, they made the move to go towards more small ball to accommodate Westbrook. And ultimately, all of those things led to Westbrook and Harden deciding they didn't want to play together anymore within a span of a year, which is nothing short of a disaster, right, from a front office perspective. And I know they were just trying to keep Harden happy. And so, a lot of the blame goes to Harden for that. But to go from, Chris Paul, who's an all-star caliber guy this year, and flip him and picks for Westbrook, then the Westbrook thing not to work, then you accommodate the rest of your team to fit Westbrook, and then he ends up, being traded a couple months after that, is a disaster. And at that point, once we got to the offseason, Harden realized he didn't really want to play with Westbrook anymore, and he didn't really think it was going to work in Houston in terms of them being championship contenders. He decided he wanted to leave. So now let's get to the specifics of the article. The entire time, the ideal spot for James Harden in his own mind was going to Brooklyn. He wanted to go to Brooklyn. He wanted to, go and play with Kevin Durant. He wanted to go and play with Kyrie Irving. He certainly was considering other options, and the longer the process of being traded went on, the longer the list was expanded to of teams that he would have preferred to play for. But ultimately, it appears as though it came down to Brooklyn and Philly, which we knew at the time that the trade actually went down. And the Miami Heat were involved here as well, which is interesting that they're named specifically here because there was all kinds of speculation around Miami. Remember, we went through the whole don't trade Tyler Hero for James Harden thing. And this article specifically talks about kind of the process of how Miami got involved and what they were willing to give up in exchange for James Harden. So it talks about the fact that Jimmy Butler had okayed the trade for James Harden. I don't know if he approved the specific trade package that was offered, or if he was just like, yeah, I'd be okay playing with James Harden. I don't really know. It doesn't specify what exactly Jimmy Butler okaying the trade meant here. But the Miami Herald reported that at the time, the Heat were open to offering two of their younger players, a 2025 first, and Andre Iguodala and Kelly Olynyk, which isn't a ton. Of course, Houston looked at that and said, no, we want to get a lot more than that. And then they started focusing more and more on the Philly stuff, the Brooklyn stuff, and then they kind of threw an offer at Miami that they would be comfortable with. They counter-offered Miami and said, if you guys can give up this, you can have James Harden. And that was reportedly Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, Precious Achiuwa, Kendrick Nunn, salary filler, 2 first-round picks, and 4 pick swaps, which in the context of what they ended up actually getting for Harden, doesn't actually seem like a ton. Obviously, it is a lot, but when you look at what the Nets gave up in terms of picks and pick swaps and a couple young players, it's honestly on par with what they ended up getting from the Nets. But Miami refused that and told the Rockets what their final offer was, and then basically pulled out when the Rockets didn't want to accept their final offer. So ultimately, the Heat were out by that point. Now, as we get to the Brooklyn and Philly stuff, it became clear that it was going to be one of those two teams. You have the Daryl Morey connection. You have the fact that KD and Kyrie are in Brooklyn, and both teams have assets to try and make this thing work. Interestingly, it does mention that some people within the Nets, now this has been not disproved. People have kind of pulled back on this and pushed back on this from within the Nets organization, but the article does mention that some people within the organization were beginning to consider the possibility of trading Kyrie Irving because of his absence from the team at the time. I don't know how legitimate that is, but the article does go out of its way to mention the fact that maybe there were some internal discussions had about potentially trading Kyrie, but ultimately Brooklyn, was always heavily interested. They were probably one of the first teams that was interested initially in a serious way. And then, Philly was as well. And of course, they ended up accepting the Nets offer of all these picks and what ended up becoming Oladipo. And they sent Jared Allen other places. And the Nets gave up pretty much everything they could in exchange for James Harden. But here's the interesting part. Here's the part that we always kind of had to piece together. We never knew if they were actually willing to deal with Philly. We never knew if Philadelphia was an actual place that James Harden could go because of the ownership situation and their relationship with Daryl Morey. And there was speculation that, Philly was involved in the negotiations, but Houston was never actually going to trade James Harden to Philadelphia. And this article kind of bears that out. It mentions that Philly was basically just being used to drive up the price from Brooklyn. I mean, they were offering Ben Simmons and draft assets, although, much less than what Brooklyn was offering. And there was actually never a real possibility that James Harden was going to be a Philadelphia 76er. It seems like in the article, Philly thought that they were going to get James Harden at some point the day of when Harden was actually traded. But from a Houston perspective, inside the Houston organization, there was pretty much zero intention of ever actually pulling the trigger on a Harden trade, as evidenced by the fact that they were negotiating with Philly, they were negotiating with Brooklyn, they were trying to drive up the price from Brooklyn. And once Philly gave them an offer, before they even accepted the offer that Brooklyn offered, they never even counter-offered what Philadelphia sent their way. Philly sent them an offer and then they never even communicated again. So that tells me that the only place, once it came down to it, once Miami pulled out, the only place James Harden was ever going to go was Brooklyn. And I guess I just thought that, yes, like there was some pettiness here from Houston and they don't want to deal with Daryl Morey, but I guess I thought that, more intelligence would have prevailed there and just trying to get the best deal for an MVP caliber guy rather than eliminating all but one possibility here by the end of it. And, who knows? Maybe they always wanted the Brooklyn package and they wanted all the picks and they just used Philly in a way that's actually really smart. But it feels like to me now reading this article, it tells me two things. One, they should have heavily considered the Philly offer. I would have rather had Ben Simmons than the picks and the possibility that Oladipo is going to lead this offseason. And two, if the Nets ever found out that Philly was never really involved, they probably wouldn't have had to give up as much as they did. They probably could have kept someone like Jared Allen, maybe not involve Cleveland and sending multiple picks, over to Houston. And so it's kind of this weird thing where, like, I wish the Nets didn't have to give up as much now, knowing that they were basically only bidding against themselves. They didn't know that, but they were basically only bidding against themselves. And on the other hand, like, if you're Houston, I get leveraging another team to drive up an offer from another team, but I didn't realize the pettiness ran that deep from Houston ownership, that they were actually unwilling to send James Harden to Philadelphia. And ultimately, maybe Philly ends up, getting the really good side of this deal because Ben Simmons has had a really, really good season. They're potentially in position to trade for someone like Kyle Lowry, and they're one of the best teams in the East, even without James Harden, even without having to give up young players or picks or anything like that. But if I'm Houston in this moment, if I'm a Rockets fan, I'm going to continue to look back on this for years and years and years. And yes, the draft picks are nice, but I still would rather have Ben Simmons. I still would rather have a proven commodity, someone that's an all-star caliber guy, someone that I know statistically his impact would improve, once he is actually on his own team and has become a really, really good all-around player and, is signed long-term as well as still young. I would rather have all of that than any of the picks or the Oladipo thing. If Oladipo was signed for multiple years, maybe you could make the case the Brooklyn offer was better. But, I've said pretty much from the beginning that I would have rather had whatever package Philly was willing to offer, Ben Simmons and Maxey and a pick, or Ben Simmons and 2 picks, or however the combination of things worked, whether it was Thibault or whatever the case may be. I would have rather had that. So some really interesting details here. I didn't realize that Miami was actually legitimately involved in this. I knew that they were kind of on the edges and that they could make an offer, but I never thought that they were actually interested enough to put, as it says, 2 of their younger players. They're being non-specific there because I do think they probably put Tyler Hero in the trade. I don't know how they would have realistically made an offer for James Harden that only included an extra first-round pick and a couple of veteran fillers in Andre Iguodala and Kelly Olynyk, and it not be Tyler Hero being one of the 2 younger players. I don't really know how that. What are they offering Duncan Robinson and Kendrick Nunn? You know what I mean? So apparently they were way more invested and way more involved in this than I ever really anticipated or got a feel for at the time. So we'll probably get more details like this over the years. 10 years from now, we'll still be getting details about what exactly happened that day that James Harden was traded. But ultimately, as a Nets fan, I'm happy that Harden's on the team, but I feel like we probably could have gotten him for less. And if I'm a Philly fan, I probably feel lucky that I got out of that and I didn't give up any of those future picks the way that Simmons is playing. And for Houston, I wish Ben Simmons was on my roster. But yeah, that's going to be the end of the first video of the day, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen as well as videos on the channel as a whole. If you like the video, If you enjoy content like this, you want to hang out with me outside of these videos, be sure to check out the Linktree link in the description below. With all those things said, hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.